Hello and welcome to another episode of Friendly Friday, a weekly series where we take a look at a budget, standard or modern deck. Today we're taking a look at the Locust God in standard. This is essentially a blue-red control deck featuring the Locust God as its main finisher of choice. So the Locust God is a 6 mana 4/4 flyer that says whenever we draw a card we get to make a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. So we get a 1/1 flyer on every draw step. But of course we also have the activated ability of the Locust God himself, which lets us draw a card and then discard, which will also make us a 1/1 flyer with haste. And then we have a lot of draw spells in the deck as well, which will help us fuel the Locust God and make tons and tons of insect tokens. And a nice thing about the Locust God is that it keeps coming back, because whenever the Locust God dies, we get to return it to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. So as long as the Locust God doesn't get countered or exiled, we get to keep replaying him, and hopefully that'll win us the game. So of course the Locust God is 6 mana, which is pretty expensive, so we do need to get there. And in order to get to the late game with tons of mana, we have lots of removal spells, some counter spells, and also some mana acceleration. So let's take a look at the removal spell package first. We've got 1 copy of Magma Spray that deals 2 damage and exiles the creature if it dies, so nice against recursive creatures like Scrapheap Scrounger, and also just a cheap interactive spell that we can maybe use in combination with other cards to play multiple spells in the same turn to kind of catch us back up if we're behind. We also have Harnessed Lightning together with an energy package to deal with larger creatures, so we've got Aether Hub and Glimmer of Genius as well that give us more energy, so hopefully we can take care of creatures that have even more than 3 toughness. Then we also have Sweltering Suns, which is a cheap sweeper dealing 3 damage to each creature, also has cycling, so we can cycle it away in matchups where it doesn't do much. And a great addition from Hour of Devastation is the namesake Hour of Devastation itself, 5 mana for a sorcery that deals 5 damage to each creature and each non-bolas planeswalker, which is a big deal since usually blue-red control decks struggle with resolved planeswalkers, and it also makes creatures lose indestructible until end of turn, which is also relevant in the standard format where there's cards like Selfless Spirit and Archangel Avacyn floating around. So hopefully Hour of Devastation buys us enough time so we can resolve our Locust God and start drawing cards and making lots of insect tokens. And of course, if we have to use Hour of Devastation with the Locust God in play, we can simply get it back to our hand and then recast it the following turn, so it's not all that bad. So those are the removal spells in the deck. We also have some counter spells in Censor that for 2 mana counters any spell unless the opponent pays 1 generic mana. Also has cycling, which means we get to draw a card, which will also trigger the Locust God, and we can just cycle it away for very cheap and then get rid of it if we don't need the Censor anymore in the late game. And we also have 1 copy of Commit to Memory, which kind of delays a spell for a turn, can also bounce a resolved permanent. And then the memory side is a nice reset button that shuffles the graveyard and hands, and everyone gets to draw 7 new cards, which in combination with the Locust God is also very nice since we'll get 7 insect tokens right away, which can maybe just close out the game on the spot. And then we also have some other draw spells in the deck, of course. We've got Hieroglyphic Illumination, which for 4 mana draws 2 cards, but also has cycling for just 1 blue mana. And we've got a Glimmer of Genius, which lets us scry 2 and then draw 2 cards, also gives us 2 energy to go with our Harnessed Lightning and Aether Hub. So this is probably my favorite draw spell in the deck. But if you have tons and tons of mana, you can also cast a huge Pull from Tomorrow, which for double blue and X lets us draw X cards, and then we just have to discard 1, which usually isn't a problem. So this can make tons and tons of insect tokens when you have the Locust God in play and you have access to a lot of mana. So speaking of access to a lot of mana, we have 4 copies of Corrupted Grafstone and 2 copies of Hedron Archive, which helps us ramp into a Locust God and use all these expensive spells. So Corrupted Grafstone is a pretty strange card, so it's a 2 mana artifact that enters the battlefield tapped and can only produce mana of a color of a card that's currently in your graveyard. So if there are no cards in your graveyard, then Corrupted Grafstone doesn't do anything. But of course we have tons and tons of 1 mana cyclers in the deck. We've got Censor, Hieroglyphic Illumination, and even 2 copies of Curator of Mysteries, which I've added as an additional 1 mana cycler to enable our Corrupted Grafstone, which means on turn 1 we can cycle one of these cards, puts a blue card in our graveyard, and then the Corrupted Grafstone can produce blue mana. Once we cast a red spell, it will also produce red mana. So the idea is to play the Grafstone on 2 after cycling on turn 1, and then on turn 3 you can cast a 4-drop already, like a Glimmer of Genius, like a Hedron Archive, or like a Hieroglyphic Illumination. And then you'll also be able to cast your expensive Hour of Devastation and the Locust God a turn earlier, and every additional mana with Pull from Tomorrow is also welcome. So that's what the Corrupted Grafstone is doing in our deck. Then we also have 2 copies of Hedron Archive, which kind of do the same, they're just kind of bigger, and for 4 mana makes 2 colorless mana rather than just 1. And we can also sacrifice the Hedron Archive to draw 2 cards, which also plays well with the Locust God once we have it in play. And then we also have 2 copies of Cathartic Reunion. To smooth out our draws, we can get rid of excess lands if we don't need those, or in the early game if we do need lands we can dig for them, and then just discard cards we don't need, like excess copies of Locust God, or maybe a Pull from Tomorrow in the early game when we can't really take advantage of it. Then our mana base, we only have 23 lands, which is kind of strange in a control deck looking to cast 6-drops, but that's basically because of all our 1-mana cyclers, so we're more likely to draw lands naturally, plus we already have some ramp cards, and draw spells also help you hit land drops, so 23 lands should be fine. So we've got 7 mountains, 8 islands, 4 Highland Lake for budget considerations, could also be Spiral of Canals, and then 4 Aether Hubs, which also help with our energy theme. Then quickly over Sideboard, we've got 2 Dispels for mostly control matchups. We've got an Essence Scatter, where countering creatures is important when they have enter the battlefield abilities or when they're expensive. We've got a Negate, which comes in also against the control decks. We've got a Confiscation Coup, which is great against creature decks, gives us an alternate win condition by stealing one of the opponent's creatures, and also works with energy, so goes with our energy theme. One Chandra's Defeat can kill Glorybringers and Chandra Torch of Defiance, which are the main targets for this card. 2 copies of Abrade, which is an interesting addition from Hour of Devastation that can deal with creatures and artifacts, so great against the blue-white monument decks where you have a removal spell that can deal with the monument, or you can just use it on a creature, which is also fine. A copy of Incendiary Flow, which is a nod to the zombie decks, which also have lots of recursive threats, and the 3 damage is slightly better than the 2 damage from Magma Spray, since that means if the opponent has a Lord in play, you can still take out some of those creatures. 2 more copies of Sweltering Suns, which also come in against zombies and the blue-white monument decks. And then 4 copies of Fevered Visions, which is kind of our plan against control decks, where resolving the Locust God might be tricky, so just landing a Fevered Visions early can just win us the game outright, and the more copies of Fevered Visions of course the better, which is why we're playing 4 copies. And it's also great with the Locust God in play, since you'll get additional insect tokens every turn. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand looks okay. We've got Censor turn 1 and then Grafstone turn 2, and then Reunion can get rid of some of these lands if we don't need them. So it looks like we're on the play here. Interesting. So opponent won the die roll, decided to let us be on the play. And they lead with Desert of the True, so this could be a mono white deck. I'm gonna cycle the Censor here, I think. We could also just keep it up to counter a potential 2-drop, but I think just casting the Grafstone turn 2 has a lot of upside. And now we can just keep up the Censor turn 3 forward perhaps. So let's just run out Grafstone. And Cathartic Reunion can maybe discard some of these Highland Lakes, so that we don't have to deal with tap lands. So let's see what the opponent has turn 2 here. Westvale Abbey. Gotta keep that in mind. Into Metallic Mimic. Alright, let's see what creature type they choose. It's gonna be a zombie. Alright, so this might be black-white zombies then, which is interesting. So they don't have any black mana yet, but yeah, we found a Glimmer of Genius, so the plan is to cast that on turn 3 thanks to Grafstone. So we're just gonna keep up Censor plus Glimmer here rather than casting our Cathartic Reunion and keeping up Censor. We can still do that next turn. So let's see what the opponent does here. They're gonna cycle a Desert of the True. Alright, that's fine. So we will not need to censor anything here, and we can just cast a Glimmer of Genius and then take 2 from this Metallic Mimic. That's totally fine. So let's cast Glimmer. And don't need lands, don't need another Grafstone. Harness Lightning is a nice one, and another Glimmer is also good. So let's see here. I think this is a decent spot to just play a tapped Highland Lake. Opponent is having some mana issues perhaps, and then we can punish them with the Censor. So I want to just keep up the Censor and Glimmer, and then play a tapped Highland Lake, since we're not going to be using that mana unless we cycle the Censor. So yeah, I'm fine just playing tapped Highland Lake, say go, and then see what the opponent does. A tapped Shambling Vent, so they did find their black mana here. And they're going to cast another Metallic Mimic. Alright, I'm fine just censoring this. We could Glimmer and look for a sweeper effect, but I'm gonna play it extra conservatively here. And then when the opponent goes to attack with their Metallic Mimic, we're also just going to Harness Lightning that. So only need to spend 1 energy. If we already had a sweeper in hand, of course it would be different, but we can't really rely on Glimmer finding us a sweeper. So now with that we have a total of 6 mana. I think this is a fine point to just cast the Cathartic Reunion, discarding Highland Lake and Curator of Mysteries, and then we can still cast our Glimmer of Genius by playing the land. Could also just discard 2 lands, and then if we don't draw land we can't cast the Glimmer is a problem. But maybe discarding the Curator is a bit too greedy, so let's hope to draw land, I guess, and then discard Island and Highland Lake and see what we draw. Alright, we found an island, nice. So now we get to keep up a Glimmer again rather than casting the Archive. It's always better when you can cast the Archive and make use of the 2 colorless mana right away, which this turn would not allow us to do, but maybe we can do that next turn. Another tapped Desert. Let's see what they have to offer. Diregraph Colossus, which luckily for us, Metallic Mimic does not count as a zombie in the graveyard, so it's basically just a 2/2 here, which is fine. Of course, next turn it could start making a bunch of zombies. And end of turn we'll cast our Glimmer, and looking for Locust Gods and Sweepers here, essentially. Those are both lands that can go to the bottom. And there's a Locust God and a Sweeper, got exactly what we asked for. We can cast our Hedron Archive and still play a 4-drop, which could be this Hieroglyphic Illumination. Could also just run out our Locust God, and then hope it doesn't get killed, since the opponent's likely gonna wanna make a bunch of zombie tokens, which we can then sweep away with our Sweltering Suns. So that would play out nicely, I think. Sure, let's go for it. We did not put the Locust God in our deck to not cast it. Could get exiled by removal spell, but then next turn we'll just play Archive plus Illumination and look for another copy of the Locust God. So ideally they just play a bunch of zombies that die to Sweltering Suns. Instead they did have the removal spell in Anguished Unmaking, did cost them 3 life, and they did not get to add anything to the board. But that's fine. We'll just, I think, play Hedron Archive now. And we could actually just play the Curator of Mysteries rather than play Illumination, since Curator still survives Sweltering Suns. And this kind of forces the opponent to keep developing their board to play into our Sweltering Suns. So let's run out our Archive and then play a Curator of Mysteries and say go. And with all this mana we can play Illumination to find more draw spells. Sweltering Suns should buy us a lot of time, and we can always Magma Spray the Colossus if we really just want to kill one creature, but the plan here is to Sweltering Suns. Opponent plays a Wayward Servant, which makes a zombie thanks to the Colossus. And there's a Censor. Alright, so now we have a bunch of decisions. So we could just attack with our Curator, Sweltering Suns the board. We would still have access to 5 mana, play a tapped Grafstone and still keep up Censor, or we can just keep up Illumination and Censor, which I kind of like a bit more, and we can still also Magma Spray something. We could actually also just Magma Spray the Diregraph Colossus, and then keep our Sweltering Suns for if the opponent commits even more creatures to the board. I kind of like that as well. Sure, so let's start by attacking for 4. That works, and now we'll Magma Spray the Colossus. See if this works. It does. So now with our 7 mana left, I think we want to play a tapped Grafstone. And say go. Keep up Illumination and Censor, and then we still have this backup Sweltering Suns. Opponent with no zombies in the graveyard yet, so any future Diregraph Colossi are still gonna be just 2/2s. Opponent with a Crypt Breaker, which does let them draw a card here if they want to. And they're gonna draw a card right away, so opponents may be looking to play a longer game, but we're just gonna cast this Illumination. Alright, that's fine. And another Harness Lightning. Alright, so I think we just hit for 4 again. And then the plan is to Sweltering Suns away the board. Opponent falls to 9. And now we can just sit on our counter spells and removal spells. And we can always sacrifice the archive if we want to draw 2 as well. Lord of the Accursed, that's fine, we can Harness Lightning that. So I don't think we want to sacrifice the archive quite yet, since the 2 mana seems useful here. So we'll kill the Lord, and then we'll just cycle the Censor here, since our opponent does have a lot of mana already here. And we even get to scry 1, so that's nice. And Pull from Tomorrow we'll definitely put on top. Also reason not to sacrifice the Hedron Archive. Alright, so let's hit for 4. Opponent already at 5 here. And then we'll play a tapped Highland Lake and say go. Could have kept it in hand to maybe discard to Pull from Tomorrow, but it's pretty likely that we just draw another land with the pull that we can discard. So totally fine if our opponent kills our Curator here. They do have 6 cards in hand. Very likely to just find another Locust God with the Pull from Tomorrow. And we do have Commit to Memory, which means that even if this game does go long, we'll be able to shuffle our graveyard back into our deck. Opponent with an Ob Nixilis Reignited. That's actually pretty annoying, so I guess we'll just commit that. So now on attack we'll put our opponent to 1. Think we still don't sacrifice the archive here. So we'll just hit for 4. If these Highland Lakes were Wandering Fumaroles, we would have won right now, but this is fine. We just get to cast a giant Pull from Tomorrow now, which is just more fun. So opponent with a Grasp of Darkness now on our Curator, that's fine. So let's cast a giant Pull from Tomorrow. And discard, I guess, an Aether Hub. And yeah, there's our Locust God, and now we get to play our Locust God and cast Illumination to make 2 hasty insects. And that's gonna do it for game 1. Alright, on to sideboarding up against black-white zombies. So they might have stuff like Gideon in the sideboard that we need to worry about, but they did not see Hour of Devastation, although they can safely assume that we have it in our deck. So additional copies of Sweltering Suns seem good. Our Incendiary Flow is for this matchup. Could see siding in the Abrades. So black-white typically doesn't have the double black recursive zombie, since it's kind of hard to cast for them. So not sure on the Magma Spray. They could also be bringing in Scrap Heap Scrounger, so in that case having Magma Spray is pretty good. So I think we'll just keep that in still. It's just a removal spell to buy us time. Cathartic Reunion seems okay. Don't think we want Fevered Visions. Confiscation Coup also seems alright. Could see siding in Negate if they have tons of Planeswalkers after sideboard, but I think we'll start without it. So this seems good, so we just need to make 4 cuts here. So kind of want to keep in the Curators just as an alternate win condition in case they side in something crazy like Lost Legacy on the Locust God. So let's just shave some cards here, I think. Censor gets a bit worse on the draw, so we can get rid of that. Cathartic Reunion is always a card we can shave, especially now that we brought in more early interaction, so we might not have the time to cast a Cathartic Reunion. Maybe let's just get rid of another Censor and another Cathartic Reunion and try it like this. So just draw spells, sweepers and removal spells, and then eventually Locust God to finish out the game. Seems alright. Let's try this. And we'll take a look at our hand here, which doesn't seem great. Opponent again chose to put us on the play, which is interesting. So this hand does have a few things going for it. It has Magma Spray and it has Censor we can cycle. But if we miss on land drops, this is not going to be great, so I think we have to mulligan. And yep, this is definitely a keepable hand. And Grafstone is interesting. I actually don't think we keep it on top since we don't have any 1-mana cyclers, so it wouldn't really ramp us into the archive. So I would rather just draw land at that point, I think. So let's put it on the bottom. Play an island, say go. Could have played a mountain to represent a Magma Spray. This represents cycling. Don't know if it really matters here though. Alright, Harness Lightning means we can kill a 2-drop at instant speed. So this hand is pretty weak to Planeswalkers. So hopefully the opponent doesn't have any of those. Metallic Mimic. I actually think we just let this happen and then use Incendiary Flow to kill it, since it doesn't look like we're gonna use our mana next turn anyways otherwise. So let's just let this happen. Alright, Magma Spray, also nice. So a lot of options on how we want to deal with this. We could just try and sweep away the board with Sweltering Suns. Doesn't work if our opponent plays a 3 toughness creature that then becomes a 4 toughness creature thanks to the Metallic Mimic. Although we could then respond with a Magma Spray, I guess. Alright, if we're not gonna Sweltering Suns or Incendiary Flow here, then we might as well just say go, keep up Magma Spray and Harness Lightning, and respond to whatever our opponent does. Tapped Shambling Vent and Crypt Breaker. Alright, I think we want to Harness Lightning the Metallic Mimic. For 1, and then let the Crypt Breaker resolve, and then Magma Spray the Crypt Breaker, because that's an actual zombie that would make the Diregraph Colossus larger. So now we get to exile it, so the opponent doesn't have a zombie in the graveyard. Another Harness Lightning. Alright, so getting to the point where we can consider cycling our Sweltering Suns, since we risk missing land drops here. But for now we'll just say go and hope our opponent doesn't have a Gideon. Opponent's gonna activate their Shambling Vent, which walks right into our Harness Lightning. So don't mind this. And there's a Locust God. Alright, I think we have to consider cycling. We kind of go shields down on representing a counterspell, but I think if we hit a land drop here it would have been important, especially if it's a tap land. Find a Glimmer instead, which means now if we do find land number 4, we're definitely in business. Opponent with no play there, so they might be holding on to some removal spells or expensive cards. I think we say go here and keep up the Censor just because we can potentially tag a 4 or 5 drop that they didn't have the opportunity to cast yet. Instead the opponent does nothing, in which case I will cycle. And there's Hour of Devastation, which we still can't cast. Alright, land is good. So I actually think we want to keep up Glimmer rather than cast Archive, because their opponent could potentially just get rid of the Archive with another exile effect, like Anguished Unmaking, and Glimmer of Genius just helps us hit our land drops naturally, plus it also still represents a potential counterspell for the opponent to play around. Diregraph Colossus is fine, just a 2/2 here. Let's see if they have a follow-up creature. They don't. So now we get to Glimmer, looking for lands essentially. And bottom both. It pains me to bottom a Glimmer, but I think we have to just find lands here. Aether Hub, a nice pickup. Alright, so I think now is a nice turn to play Hedron Archive and then Incendiary Flow the Colossus. So make sure not to tap out of red. And this is the turn I was talking about earlier, where you get to use the Archive right away for mana. And we will waste some mana here, but that's fine. Opponent with 7 cards in hand, so they either have lots of removal spells or lots of expensive 5 drops that they can't cast. Crypt Breaker. Do they have 3 zombies this turn? No, Anguished Unmaking, so there we go, they did have it after all. So they might have another one of those in hand. Aether Hub, a nice draw. Let's play Aether Hub. And now the question is if we want to do anything about the Crypt Breaker. Still have an Hour of Devastation in hand. Could run out the Locust God here. Have the opponent basically kill it, since they're very likely to have an answer to it, but hopefully it's not another Anguished Unmaking and instead a Grasp of Darkness. Yeah, I think we just run out the Locust God here. Otherwise we're not really doing much. And see if we get to untap with it. A Relentless Death, alright, so the opponent does have Relentless Death after all, despite being black-white. But no zombie in the graveyard yet. And does look like we get to untap with our Locust God. So we'll get our first insect token here. And Confiscation Coup, also a nice one. So I think we just want to fly over for 5. And then we have to see what we want to do about the Relentless Death and the Crypt Breaker. Could just steal one of them. Although not that great when we also have an Hour of Devastation in hand. Could use the Locust God's ability here, pre-combat, just to get in for an additional damage with our insect. Or we can just keep up Commit to Memory as well as the ability to potentially counter another Obnixilis or expensive Planeswalker. That might be better. In which case we're just gonna hit for 5 here. And then sit back on the Locust God's ability and our instance. If the opponent plays a zombie, we can always respond by killing the Crypt Breaker. They might actually make a zombie right now. In which case, I actually don't mind using Harness Lightning on the Crypt Breaker, so they don't get to untap and draw a card by tapping 3 zombies. So Crypt Breaker down, but we're still keeping up our commits and our Locust God activation. If our opponent plays a ton of zombies here, then we could Hour of Devastation. Instead they have a Lay Bare the Heart, which is going to get rid of one of our cards in hand, which I don't really like, so I think we'll just have to commit that. And then keep in mind that our opponent's gonna redraw that in a couple turns. And next turn we can actually also just consider casting Memory and getting 7 insects. Does seem pretty sweet. Would just be a bit sad if our opponent has a Grasp of Darkness to kill our Locust God in response. But then they probably would have killed it already, since now we get an additional insect token. Alright, so the correct play might be just to Confiscation Coup one of the opponent's creatures. But the sweet play has to be cast Commit to Memory. We would get 7 insects, so that's 7, 8, 9, 13. Yeah, this might actually just be the correct play after all. So let's play a tapped Highland Lake. Let's cast Memory. And lots of triggers. And there we go. Move to combat. Attack with all creatures. And that does it. Sweet, managed to beat black-white zombies with a Memory for the win. On to the next one. Alright, back for our second match here, and this hand doesn't really do much. Don't have any interaction with our opponent, and we are on a draw. But it is a functional hand in that we get to cycle Cathartic Reunion and look for potential answers. So I don't think we can mulligan this, but it is definitely a weak hand that can die to a quick start from the opponent. If the archive were our Grafstone, then this hand would look a lot better, since then we get to play a Grafstone turn 2 that is already active by cycling the Illumination. Opponent with a Soulscar Mage turn 1. So yep, looks like we're in trouble as the opponent's off to a quick start with the 1-drop. So hopefully we can find one of our sweeper effects sooner rather than later. Or just our removal spells in general would be good. Alright, another Illumination, so we'll just play Island, say go, and the plan is to cycle Illumination end of turn. Opponent with a Ramuna Peruns, so that could deal some damage later this game. So just an attack for 1 it looks like, which is not too bad. And a follow-up Falconwrath Gorger. Alright, that's gonna hurt. And another Soulscar Mage. So our best draw here would be Mountain into Sweltering Suns. Instead we draw an Island from our cycle. And what do we draw for our draw step? We'll probably just cast our Cathartic Reunion here, looking for interaction. Well, there's an Hour of Devastation, which is something to work towards. We might be dead before we get to cast it, given that we were on the draw. But yeah, let's just cast a Reunion, discarding... The Archive's not gonna help us ramp into the Hour of Devastation, so I think we just discard an Illumination and an Archive here. Keep the lands. Could also see discarding an Island since we need double red, but don't want to miss land drops when we need to get up to 5. So let's just discard Illumination and Hedron Archive. Hope to draw something spicy. A Corrupted Grafstone would also be alright, since that would let us cast Hour of Devastation on turn 4. Alright, there's a Grafstone. So we might get to cast Hour of Devastation before we die. Hopefully the opponent can't enable Prowess here, otherwise we're gonna get hurt. Thermal Alchemists, so that's another creature that could die to our Hour of Devastation. Opponent has 3 cards left in hand, hits us for 4 down to 15. And we draw an Archive. Alright, so luckily we have a red card in the graveyard for Hour of Devastation, but we also have an Aether Hub that could let us cast the Hour of Devastation with double red. Let's just play the Aether Hub just in case we need the energy in future turns. And then play Grafstone. And then keep up the cycle on Hieroglyphic Illumination. And then we can still cycle our Illumination. A sorcery speed creature would be nice. Instead it's an Incendiary Flow, which enables Prowess, enables Thermal Alchemist, so that's gonna be a lot of damage here. So opponent dealing us a total of 11 damage. So we're not dead yet, but if they have any burn spells or just activate the ruins, we're probably gonna be dead. And another creature, alright, that's good. Plays into our Hour of Devastation. Opponent can still ping us for 1 with the Thermal Alchemist, so we would be stable at 4 life essentially. And now we definitely just have to cast our Hour of Devastation. Opponent pings us for 1, and all creatures are dead. Opponent with 2 cards left, hopefully no 2 burn spells. Uncrop Crasher, certainly gonna do a good impression of a burn spell, as it's gonna hit us for 3 with haste, and then the ruins, once the opponent gets to 5 mana, is gonna kill us, so we need to find an answer to the Crasher and also find a win condition, which is gonna be difficult here, so we have to cast Pull from Tomorrow and leave us enough mana to kill the Crasher. And I think that means leaving up 2 mana so we can still cast Harness Lightning. Alright, and then hope to find Harness Lightning. We did not, so we're just dead. I guess we can let our opponent finish us off here. Maybe they show us an additional card that can be relevant after sideboard. So mono red, definitely not a great matchup for any control deck, but after sideboard it does get better once we get access to more Sweltering Suns and more cheap interaction in general. Opponent moves straight to combat and we're dead. Alright, let's take a look at our sideboard, where Chandra's Defeat is excellent, Abrade seems okay since it's just an instant speed removal spell, Sweltering Suns, good. Incendiary Flow I'm less sure about since it is sorcery speed, so definitely interested in these removal spells. Confiscation Coup seems a little slow. Negate I could see adding it since it can potentially counter a burn spell, but we'll see about that. We're on the play, so Censor is still fine, although our opponent has lots of 1-drops, which makes Censor a bit worse. Essence Scatter can counter a hasty creature potentially. What do we not want? I don't think we have time to cast Cathartic Reunion in this matchup, although it does help us find our more relevant cards, I guess. Commit to Memory seems a bit slow. I don't think we want both Pull from Tomorrows. Could also see shaving a Locust God, but we do need a way to finish out the game quickly. Maybe we just shave a Censor. And so our plan is essentially to remove all our opponent's creatures and then cast some ramp cards, draw some cards, and then hopefully land a Locust God pretty early on and then win that way. Hope our opponent doesn't draw too many burn spells and draws a lot of creatures instead. If we want to protect against burn spells, the spell doesn't do all that much since most of their burn spells are sorceries. Could see adding a Negate just to counter a burn spell, but it is difficult to keep up mana since this deck isn't really designed to play lots of counter spells, since it's more a tap out style of deck. Could see adding the Essence Scatter for Ancrop Crashers, maybe Glory Bringers after Sideboard. But I think our current configuration makes sense. So I think we just submit this. Could maybe shave an Hour of Devastation in favor of a Negate or Essence Scatter now that we've added a couple Sweltering Suns as well. I think we'll go with a Negate and try it like this. Alright. We'll definitely be on the play. And this hand's okay, I guess. We've got interaction with Magma Spray and Abrade, so I guess we'll keep. Opponent mulls to 6, so tapped Highland Lake go. And Falkenrath Gorger from the opponent. Let's just play Islands and say go. And if our opponent attacks, we will probably just use one of our burn spells here, not sure which one yet. Opponent with a Sunscorched Desert, dealing us 1. They can also sacrifice this later with their ruins. And Earth Shaker Chandra. Alright, so now we definitely know which removal spell to use, since we can just Magma Spray the Chandra, so our opponent doesn't get to eternalize that later in the game. So opponent attacks us with 2 hasty creatures, and we'll Magma Spray the Chandra. Could also actually Abrade the Falkenrath Gorger if we're planning to use the Magma Spray on the Chandra, since it prevents the same amount of damage, but maybe we find something that uses up our mana more next turn. So actually I think this makes sense as well. So just take 2 from the Chandra. And then here, let's see if we draw anything that we want to cast. Illumination, which we could cycle, or we could keep to cast later in the game. Definitely not a straightforward decision. So we will be Magma Spraying this Earth Shaker Chandra for sure. Play Aether Hub, get an energy, so I think we just say go. Don't know if there's a reason to Magma Spray the Chandra right now if our opponent has a bunch of bump spells, but I don't think they do. So maybe if they go to enchant it with something, we can punish them by casting our Magma Spray. If they just move to beginning of combat, then we'll just Magma Spray it. Alright, Ancrop Crasher, which is also a creature worth Magma Spraying since it'll prevent more damage. Yeah, I think we'll just Magma Spray the Crasher here. Could have also cycled the Illumination to try and draw a Censor to just counter the Crasher. But I think we'll just Magma Spray here, and then the plan is to cast the Illumination since we're pretty much out of gas here, so we might need the extra cards. Alright, Harness Lightning, not bad. So we can just play out our Hedron Archive, or we can just play the Illumination. I kind of like playing Illumination, or at least keeping it up. That way next turn we can play Archive plus Harness Lightning. The advantage of casting the Archive right now is that if we draw something like the Locust God, we can play it next turn. I think I like just casting the Illumination here, since if our opponent commits another creature, we can just maybe find the Sweltering Suns and cast it. That way we didn't have to waste our Harness Lightning. Opponent cycles a Desert of the Fervent, that's fine. Plays another Sunscorched Desert. So opponent definitely on the desert plan here. And do they have another hasty 2-drop? They do, another Earth Shaker Chandra. Oh well, we'll get hit for 4 here. And then hopefully we can find some answers. So cast Illumination. Draw 2 Highland Lakes, that's not what we were looking for here. Hopefully our draw step brings something good. After seeing the Chandra, I might reconsider bringing in the Incendiary Flow. It's still not great since it doesn't kill the hasty Chandra at instant speed, but it does exile it, which is relevant. Although our opponent has lots of things to do with their mana, they can sacrifice deserts with the ruins, they can eternalize the Chandra. We drew a Censor for the turn, so I think we'll just be playing out our Hedron Archive, and then we can either cast Harness Lightning or Censor, according to what our opponent does. And then we have to find our Locust God soon here to try and stabilize the board. Opponent attacks us for 4, we'll be using our Harness Lightning. For just 1. And we'll take 2 down to 8. Opponent doesn't cast anything and we find an Abrade. So kind of just want to cycle the Censor, since it's probably not going to counter anything. We can't counter Eternalize, so just want to try and find something relevant here. And instead we find a mountain. So we can sacrifice our Hedron Archive here if we want to, which I think we do. Alright, we found Harness Lightning and Hour of Devastation. So since we can't cast 2 of our 2-drops next turn anyways, we might as well play a tap land and then keep up Abrade and Harness Lightning. Let's see if our opponent starts chucking deserts at us. Not yet, so they want to get up to 6 to Eternalize the Chandra. But we can Harness Lightning the Eternalized Chandra here if we want to prevent the most damage, and I think we will. Opponent tries to attack us for 6, and we'll prevent 4 of that damage. Still take 2 down to 6, and our opponent basically has all the deserts they need in play to kill us with the ruins here. So really need to find a win condition here. Instead we find another mountain. So we're just forced to play a tapped Highland Lake and say go. And then cast Abrade on the Chandra when it attacks. Don't want to do that in our turn, otherwise they can Eternalize again. Alright, opponent attacks us for 2. We will Abrade. So don't take any damage yet, but definitely still in a lot of trouble. And Glimmer of Genius is interesting. I think we have to actually main phase this Glimmer, in case we find some sorcery speed cards we want to play out on our turn. Still looking for finishers here. Although with an Eternalized Chandra in the graveyard and the ruins, I think the Locust God arrived a little too late here. So if we take the Locust God and bottom the Glimmer, we basically have to hope to find another instant speed removal spell. But I think we have to keep the Locust God on top, since that's the only way we can actually win the game. So top the God, bottom the Glimmer, and find a mountain. So we should just be dead here, if our opponent remembers to use their ruins end of turn. Down to 4. They actually have an interesting decision whether or not to keep using the land or Eternalize the Chandra. They decide to just go for the land plan here. And, well, I guess we can play a Locust God. And then, let's see, they just use a land, we don't have any life gain in the deck. I guess we're representing a disallow that could still counter the trigger here. So we'll just say go rather than cycling to get in for 1. Since that wouldn't really be changing our clock anyways. Opponent does, however, go for the ruins. And we're at 2. Let's see if they use it once more. They have a second ruins as well. So our Locust God came a little bit too late, unfortunately. Let's see if they respect the disallow. They do, so we can't cycle the Illumination, otherwise we're just dead. They're gonna upkeep, use the ruins here, it looks like. So we can cast our Illumination in response. But we don't have any disallows in the deck, so probably not gonna find anything worthwhile. Can cycle Sweltering Suns and make some more insects. But that's gonna do it for this second match. So mono red, unsurprisingly, beats the control deck. So we'll be back for the third match. Alright, we're on the play for our third match. Unfortunately, no lands, so we'll have to mulligan this one. This seems like a keep. And a land will keep on top. And we'll lead with islands and say go. And planning to cycle the Illumination here. So we have plenty of mana with our Hedron Archives, and we have our Locust God, so hopefully we can assemble both and then resolve the Locust God, play a mountain, say go. Opponent with a Flooded Pools into Evolving Wilds, so they're also off to a very slow start, which should be good for us, as the Locust God should trump most late game scenarios unless they can counter it, which of course they can easily do. I don't think we want to cycle our Curator here, since we already have enough mana to cast our Locust God and we might need the additional threat. Opponent cycles their own Illumination, sacks Evolving Wilds to get a mountain, so might be a Grixis Nicol Bolas control deck. And they say go, we'll just jam this Hedron Archive if they want to counter it, that's fine. We have a second one anyways. And we'll say go. Opponent with an Abrade, alright, that's unfortunate. Some control decks have started playing that main deck. So they did get the better of that exchange, but still they're stuck on 3 mana here. So not the end of the world. And now we get to play another Hedron Archive, I think. And now we get to play around Censor as well. I think we go for that rather than our Curator of Mysteries. Let's see if they counter it now. Supreme Will, alright, that's fine. So we can't pay 3, so it's countered. So next turn if we draw land we can go Grafstone plus Curator. I don't think we want to cycle the Curator here. Another Locust God, alright, so let's just play a Grafstone and say go. I guess we should have tapped our Aether Hub there, just to have double blue mana to represent more counter spells. Another Supreme Will, but this time they're gonna look at the top 4, that's fine. Could always cycle the Curator to hope to hit Censor, but that's kind of a stretch. 4 mana for our opponent, no plays. They're gonna play this draw-go game with us, which is fine. So I think we just wanna tap out for our Locust God here, since they haven't cycled any Censors, although they did tap out for Supreme Will. They could have perhaps cycled the Censor when they cast the Abrade. So I don't think they have a Censor here, but I could be wrong. Otherwise we could just play our Curator and keep up Censor. I think we want to tap out and kind of want to get this countered. Instead our opponent with a Glimmer of Genius in response. So they will not be countering our Locust God, and once it's in play, it's gonna wreak havoc on our opponent. Unless, of course, they kill it and then counter it on the way back. But that's another problem. So our Locust God resolves. And we get to say go. Don't have double red for a potential Chandra yet. Instead, they just have a Harness Lightning. So that's fine. Our Locust God will return to our hand. Where perhaps they can counter it with a Censor unless we draw land. Or perhaps another Supreme Will. So our Locust God returns and there's a land. So now we get to play around a Censor. Is it another Supreme Will? Alright, sweet. And if they actually have the other card from the Supreme Will cycle that makes us sacrifice a creature, we can cycle in response to get an insect token, so we sacrifice the insect token instead. So that's pretty neat. Opponent with land number 6, so 1 turn away from Nicol Bolas. And we'll just cycle the Censor here to get an insect. Draw a card. They could kill the Locust God in response, but they do not. I guess we should have done that at the end of the second main phase rather than the end step, otherwise we perhaps wouldn't have gotten our Locust God back into our hand. Alright, we drew Cathartic Reunion, which is a little risky in the face of counterspells, since if the opponent counters this, then we just discarded 2 cards for no reason. So I don't think we want to cast our Cathartic Reunion. Instead, I think we just want to use the activated ability of the Locust God, discarding our Cathartic Reunion. So let's do that instead. So we'll discard our Cathartic. And then we can still play a land and then attack for 7. And then still keep up our Cyclers and another Locust God activation. And 3 times 7 is 21, so should be a 3-turn clocker unless our opponent wants to respond with something like a Torrential Gearhulk to flash back one of their removal spells. Which is fine. Our creatures have flying, so they won't be able to block with the Gearhulk. So they're going with a Harness Lightning on what looks like our Locust God. So we could cycle the Sweltering Suns in response here, or we could use the activated ability. I think we just use the ability here, I guess. Since we're probably not gonna wanna cycle our Curator here. And then discard Highland Lake. Get an extra token, which can potentially block the Torrential Gearhulk. Now if our opponent has their own copy of Hour of Devastation, their Torrential Gearhulk will survive while sweeping away our insect tokens. So that could be a problem, but we will get back our Locust God. I will chump with our insects just in case of Hour of Devastation shenanigans. Want to stay at a high life total. Plus Nicol Bolas can also deal 7 to us, so gotta be careful. Alright, so I think we start by attacking for 3. And then we have the option of playing Curator or Locust God. I think we still go with the Locust God here. See if they have a counterspell. Disallow, that's fine. We still have another Locust God. Opponent sacks Evolving Wilds. And let's see if they finally want to cast their Nicol Bolas. They can play around Censor here. So we'll take 5. It looks like they're going for it. Perhaps... Yep, 7 mana. There it is. Nicol Bolas. So let's see if they want a +2 here. Or +1. So we have to exile 2 cards of our hand. So we'll be exiling Sweltering Suns plus Curator. But I guess we might as well cycle the Curator. Just to see. Alright, so I think we'll just exile Sweltering Suns and Island. And in our turn we can play our Locust God. And then we can cycle our Curator to get another hasty insect. Would let us attack Nicol Bolas for 4. Or we can just start attacking our opponent, although it is likely their opponent has an Hour of Devastation at the ready. So I think we just need to cycle our Curator here and hope they don't have it. Pull from Tomorrow. Alright. I think we play a tapped Highland Lake. That way hopefully they don't make us discard our last card, since we only have 1 card left anyways. And now we have to decide if we want to go after our opponent's life total or after Nicol Bolas. Yeah, I think we attack Nicol Bolas here. That might incentivize our opponent to either -4 or +2 rather than +1. And if we can keep our Locust God in play and resolve a big pull from Tomorrow, then we can potentially steal this game. Opponent is going to use a +2. And they reveal a Censor. Alright, that's good for us. Are they gonna sit back on counter spells? Looks like an Hour of Devastation is incoming. Nope, they have their own copy of the Locust God. Alright, alright. Torrential Gearhulk is gonna attack, we'll take it. Because we need our Locust God to survive here. Draw a card. Make an insect. So now we have 5 insects, so our opponent definitely can just block our Locust God with their Locust God. So we have 5 insects. We can make 5, 6, 7 more. So that would be a total of 12 insects, which could wipe out Nicol Bolas or threaten to kill our opponent. If we were to find a Harness Lightning for the Locust God, then let's see. We would pull from Tomorrow for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then find an untapped land plus Harness Lightning. Then we would have lethal if our opponent can't interact with us, which means they wouldn't have another Harness Lightning or a Censor. I think that's probably our best bet still though, since if our opponent untaps we're probably just dead. I guess we'll tap our Grafstone to play around Abrade shenanigans. So we haven't played a land yet. So I guess this is X equals 6. Let's see if they have a Negate. Nope. So we get lots of triggers here. Still have to discard a card, and we did find a Harness Lightning. Alright, so if they have nothing, we could win here. So let's ditch our Highland Lake, I guess. Make tons of hasty insects. Play a land and then Harness Lightning the Locust God. Hope they don't have a Censor. Alright, they do have a Censor, but they're just cycling it rather than casting it. So they get a flying blocker, which means we can't deal lethal with our Locust God here. But we will still be killing it. So we can't deal lethal to our opponent, but we certainly can do some damage to Nicol Bolas and to our opponent. So let's move to combat. And the Locust God is going to attack our opponent. And then we want to attack Nicol Bolas with 7 tokens. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then probably leave back an insect at least to block the Gearhulk. Maybe more. I think we just leave back 1. And attack like this. So Nicol Bolas should die. And then our opponent has the option of blocking our Locust God to prevent 4 damage. Or trade it with an insect. So they trade with an insect that was attacking them. And they have a Magma Spray as well, so they're actually not saving Nicol Bolas. Well, they could have if they blocked the other insect and killed another insect, so actually didn't play around Magma Spray there. Opponent gets back their copy of the Locust God. And let's see if our opponent has the Hour of Devastation. I guess just Sweltering Suns would also be pretty decent. Gearhulk attacks, I'm certainly blocking here. So looks like no Hour of Devastation, but maybe Sweltering Suns. Alright, this also works, I guess. Bontu's Last Reckoning. Opponent doesn't get to untap though, so there's that. And we do get to recast our Locust God. Opponent only 3 cards left in hand. Alright, so the game's gonna go on for a while here, it looks like. So let's replay a Locust God. Alright, and looks like our opponent has had enough. So we managed to win the first game despite our opponent resolving their Nicol Bolas. So yeah, the Locust God definitely has some legs and some wings. So let's go on to sideboarding. And this is where our anti-control package comes in. Fevered Visions is definitely a card we want. Magma Spray can go out, same with Sweltering Suns. Negate's gonna come in, Dispel comes in. I don't mind Essence Scatter to counter Gearhulks. Confiscation Coup we could bring in to steal one of our opponent's win conditions, but it is pretty expensive, so I'm not sure about that. Chandra's Defeat could kill an opposing Locust God, but it's pretty narrow. Same with these other removal spells, so what do we want to take out? Hour of Devastation seems pretty bad. I do like keeping in some copies of Harness Lightning just to answer our opponent's win conditions, so I don't think I want to take out those. Hedron Archive could be a liability against Abrade, but I don't think our opponent's going to keep in their Abrades. So could just remove our 2 copies of Cathartic Reunion, which are pretty bad against counter spells. And then we need to cut 1 more card. I guess we can cut a Censor since we're on the draw here, most likely. And it is a lot weaker on the draw than on the play. Keep in all our draw spells and then just basically hope to land Fevered Visions early and ride that to victory. Alright, this hand looks acceptable. So I will be keeping. Opponent with an Aether Hub. And there's our Fevered Visions, alright, so we have a plan. Opponent of course on the play, so they have plenty of counter spells to potentially counter our Fevered Visions. And Transgress the Mind is just gonna probably take our Fevered Visions, so that plan probably is not gonna work. They do take the Fever Visions after all. Well, we just drew another one, so that's great. Now we get to keep up Censor. Opponent with Scavenger Grounds. Interesting. And we could cycle our Censor here, since we do need to make sure we keep hitting our land drops. Yeah, sure, let's cycle our Censor. Another Fevered Visions, alright. They were all on top of our deck. Let's play Mountain and play Fevered Visions number 1. And if our opponent has a counterspell, they will need to use their Aether Hub energy mana. Yep, Negate. But we have more Fevered Visions on the way. And their opponent now with no blue mana. In fact, they can't even cast a double red spell here, so we should be in decent shape. Play Aether Hub. Play Fevered Visions number 2. Third Fevered Visions of the match. So let's start drawing some cards. There's a Negate. Opponent finally with blue mana. Opponent takes 2 from our Fevered Visions. There's a Locust God. So I think we want to play out our Hedron Archive. And then we still have Negate mana up. Could also cast Glimmer, but I would rather ramp our mana now that we drew the Locust God. Could have an Abrade here, but I don't think they should have kept those in. So we get to draw. Corrupted Grafstone. Tap land from the opponent. Another Transgress the Mind. They can't take or Negate with it, but they would be able to take our Locust God. So I think we just counter it anyways. Let's see if the opponent wants to counter back. They do, so they will get to take either Glimmer or Locust God, but we still have our pull from tomorrow, which is great. So, still in a decent spot here. They do take the Locust God. Opponent down to 16. Alright, so a few options here. We can just cast a giant pull from tomorrow, or we can keep developing our mana and also play a Corrupted Grafstone. So if we play the Corrupted Grafstone, we can only pull for 3, which is kind of weak. So I think we'll just pull for the full amount. And do that now to play around counterspells. This way we keep hitting our lands as well. Alright, we can discard a Grafstone here. Play a Highland Lake, say go. Opponent says go as well. Fevered Visions takes down. So, what do we want to do? I think we want to not play the Locust God, since that's probably just going to get countered, although we can pay 3 for a Supreme Will. Opponent might have a Torrential Gearhulk they want to play end of turn here. I think we are probably fine just casting the Locust God here. See what happens. Could have waited a turn until we could also cast Commit to Memory. And their opponent has their own copy of Commit, that's fine. And in that case, I think I will just play a Corrupted Grafstone and say go. And so we can draw our Locust God at instant speed with our Curator of Mysteries here. Opponent cycles a Censor as well. Our opponent might go for a Nicol Bolas here, but then they're tapped out. And we get to resolve our Locust God. Opponent takes more damage. Alright, so play a land. Lots of mana here. So I think we try and go for our Locust God once again. Opponent could go Torrential Gearhulk commit, but now we have our own commit at the ready. So I think we just keep jamming this. So Locust God, does it resolve? Looks like a Torrential Gearhulk. Yep, and we will commit that. So our opponent can't commit our Locust God. And then we can even cycle our Curator to make a hasty 1/1. Alright. So now our opponent might be forced to try and resolve their Nicol Bolas. Get another insect from Fevered Visions. Evolving Wilds from our opponent, so they will only have 7 mana at the ready. Only 2 blue mana. Still 5 cards in hand, so Fevered Visions will deal some damage here. Opponent down to 9, but now we know they have that Torrential Gearhulk in hand. So I think we want to just cast this Illumination. Draw 2, get 2 insects. And yep, that does it. Alright, sweet. The Locust God beats Nicol Bolas. And it brings us to a 2-1 record in the end, which is definitely not bad for a rogue deck like this one that's also built on a budget. So I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached, we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.